And joining me today, we have CTO Twin Power with Maxim Yankowski, who's a CTO at Zettaset, and Taylor Holloway, who's Advent One's CTO. So at Red Hat, I'm lucky enough to look after our partnership with Advent One, who out of more than 2,500 partners in Australia and New Zealand is one of only 2 local partners to achieve premier partnership status with Red Hat. This is our highest tier, and reaching this means that in addition to meeting very strict training and certification requirements, that in essence, we have a very strong and true partnership that's proven time and again to lead to great outcomes for our clients. There are several documented case studies from amongst these clients. And in addition, Advent One has been recognized year over year from Red Hat with several awards, including most recently being named Red Hat Innovation Partner of the Year. This is just a snapshot of our partnership and Advent One's capabilities. In addition to their managed service practice, they offer consulting and security services and do risk assessments based around CIS compliance and alignment to the Essential 8. And we have many joint customers, I think over 45 now and growing. So in addition to working with Advent One, I get the opportunity to work with a select few of our strategic alliance partners. These primarily are global software companies that make products designed to run on OpenShift. And these companies have gone through a rigorous process for their technology to become certified Red Hat OpenShift operator. And Zettaset is one of these companies. They are tackling the protection for the zettabytes of data that have and are being created. I think a recent IDC study found that the global data sphere will grow to 175 zettabytes of data by 2025. And in case you're wondering, I looked that up, and it's precisely 175 trillion USB sticks with a 1 gigabyte capacity. So that's a lot of data. We know there's a lot of data. And we also know from what we're seeing at Red Hat that there is a lot of container adoption happening. And Red Hat is leading the way with OpenShift. So, what is driving this, and what capability is this giving to our clients? It's giving them, the containers are giving our clients the ability to deliver capabilities through secure software applications rapidly and continuously. However, for many of our customers, the core business applications have been architected and developed so they can't easily evolve or change quickly to meet the rapidly changing business requirements. Or are they in a position to really efficiently develop and maintain these new applications? So this, though, doesn't mitigate the needs and the demands to increase revenue, reduce costs, lower security risks, and bring more of their products and services to market faster so that they can stay competitive. But with so many workloads moving and so much data, what are customers worried about? This report is, the sixth iteration of this report that Red Hat has looked at across more than 300 security leaders from within our DevSecOps community around the world. Not all of these are Red Hat customers, some are non. But what respondents are telling us is that where they're really concerned is about the workloads at the runtime phase. So why is this, and how do organizations, what is best practice to keep container and data security safe at the runtime phase and across all the phases, really? The old model that organizations use for virtual environments doesn't work for containers, that agent access model. So agents don't work because they destroy the portability. You can no longer deploy a workload anywhere across the hybrid cloud because you need all that agent infrastructure in place. And the access doesn't work because it destroys consistency. So if you have a configuration or a firewall changing from under the container workload, then you've lost the consistency and you can't move from development to production, for example. So Red Hat offers a lot of security in our OpenShift Platform Plus technology, including code analysis, runtime analysis, audit, and monitoring. But when it comes to data, we have to partner with the experts, and that technology comes from Zettaset. So I'd like to now ask Maxim to just talk to us about Zettaset and how you go about solving these challenges of keeping data safe in containers.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Jenna. And I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, should be coming up. Again, thank you, Jenna, for laying down a foundation for this, and thank you for having us. We're very excited to talk to you about data protection, and we're going to talk about data protection today in the context of what we call the Zero Trust Reference Blueprint. A little bit of a background on that. It's essentially a solution blueprint, a very specific one, that have recently been put together by the United States Department of Defense and the National Security Agency. And while it is predominantly applicable to the United States, of course, high security environments as well as commercial environments, it provides certain reference points and certain technological approaches to data protection, entity analysis, behavioral analysis of entities, which lend itself very, very well in the data protection landscape overall. That is the case because as we are looking at modern environments, whether it's a smart hospital with large number of IoT devices, whether it's a telecommunication provider with extraordinarily large and fast 5G network infrastructure, the number of devices is staggering. And let's not forget that every device is a potential attack vector. And while we're working to protect the data, the bad actors are actually working to compromise the data and compromise the devices and use every single one of those devices as a potential attack vector to gain access to the environments, to breach the environments. And like I always say, it's going to get really scary really fast, but by the end of the presentation, we'll provide you with some takeaways, methodologies, and of course, tools to really protect your environment. But it's important to understand what it is we're walking into. And the environment we're in, the day and age we're in, is that your environment will be breached. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of time. So once the environment is breached, you would want to use the tools we provide to contain the breach, to detect it early, and to respond to it in a way that will not compromise your entire environment. Oftentimes you see the mentioning of ransomware attack that incapacitate pretty large infrastructure and pretty significant ones. And then those infrastructures are required to pay a pretty hefty price to recover from ransomware, but at the same time, they then have to spin up their backups and spend substantial amount of time recovering. That's obviously a dramatic impact to the business. So Zero Trust provides the tools. It provides the framework and understanding that gets you to the point where you can actually understand that the compromise will happen. You realize what it takes to detect the compromise and what it takes to put together a system, of course, with Red Hat platform in the middle of it and Advent One services around it, and so that you end up with a secure platform that is responsive and scalable. At the center of it, we position what we call the cryptographic services. And this is not just encryption. Encryption to us, and we've been doing encryption for many, many years, encryption to us is essentially commodity technology that enables us to protect the data in a granular fashion. And more importantly, detect the compromises and respond to compromises in a timely fashion and without compromising the integrity of the entire environment. Cryptographic key management services are definitely tied to entities and resource identities. We're going to talk about this further down in the presentation. And of course, OpenShift and Kubernetes in general, they're de facto for microservices approaches. And we're going to talk now about why microservices. I mean, we've come from the world of dedicated hardware. We used to provision servers. Then we moved into the world of virtualized hardware. Right? We started dealing with VMs. We're now faced with the fact that VMs are also extraordinarily heavy. is for both in terms of resource consumption and in terms of provisioning. And as hardware and the virtualization get more powerful, there is no excuse for not virtualize further. Why do we need to virtualize further? As we said on the previous slide, the number of devices, number of services, number of users, number of entities grows and continues to grow exponentially. The amount of data continues to grow. So we need to approach it from the perspective of what's called microsegmentation. Microsegmentation basically involves an approach where you have one service for one function or one task. And that way you can scale your data access, that way you can scale your services. If you look at, for example, a 5G network, you'll notice that in the design of 5G, microservices are kind of built into the architecture. They're there to provide multi-tenancy and to provide increased business value by essentially lending your data to other entities, to third-party partners, and so on and so forth. And with that, we enter into what we call the DevSecOps, the development, security, and operations. It's a pretty unique blend between the development activities, deployment of the products of those activities in production, and then finally operating those in a secure fashion. And it's important to understand that security needs to be baked in from the get-go, from the development processes, all the way to deployment to production, to operations in what we call the day two activity. Because security is an afterthought. It's going to get really intrusive and really expensive, not necessarily computational, but from the transparent aspect of it. Once we deploy a secure solution, and once we make it scale, we need to be able to centrally manage that. Because if we have large number of OpenShift clusters, if we have large number of devices, we need to have centralized management in order to be able to scale that environment and bring additional environments online really quickly. So as we said, the baseline is every device is an attack vector, and there's a whole lot of those devices. So now let's talk about zero trust tenets. These are the basic principles of the zero trust blueprint I referenced earlier in the presentation. And those basic principles are basically telling you that there is absolutely no trust in any environment, in any entity. And we're always assuming once the environment is deployed, as soon as the first user gets in, we assume that the environment is hostile. We cannot trust the environment. We assume that the entity behaviors and entities being users, services, processes, anything that accesses data, think of it as an entity. We assume that entity behaviors are not static. A device can be compromised and become an untrusted device in a matter of microseconds. So we assume the hostile environment. We presume that by the time we're looking at the environment, the breach has already happened. It's kind of a dark view in the world, but it's also a realistic one because, like I said, while we're working to protect the environments, hackers are just as motivated to break in. So we presume breach. And we never trust any identity. We move from the concept of a static identity that's granted to you at the time you connect to the environment. We move to the concept of a dynamic identity based by influenced by the identity by the entity behavior. So as a trusted device, if I am now changing my behavior and start attacking the systems, zero trust based system is now able to detect the change in my behavior and adjust the security policies. So then when I try to access the data, my updated security policy will no longer allow me access. And this is enabled by explicit scrutiny, looking at all the activities at all times and applying the unified analytics. So while I'm operating as a trusted or untrusted device, there are watchers, there are entities that are watching over every single data-related activity and are essentially modifying the access policies in real time. As far as security principles, there's many more than 4, but we're going to look at the first 4 core ones. The first one, of course, is prevention. And if we can prevent the attack completely, then we're in great shape. However, we will never be able to prevent every single attack. And so what we do is we settle for continuous authentication and authorization. Like I said before, we don't assume that the entity will remain trusted throughout its operational lifecycle. We put in the tools and technologies to use advanced activity monitoring and entity-based analytics so that we can characterize the entity's behavior and we can quickly detect, quickly and timely and accurately, detect that the entity's behavior has changed and potentially the entity has become untrusted. We can then put in additional bits of technology to allow us to respond to the changes in the entity behavior by adjusting the real-time policies. In order for us to do that, we need what we call a centralized data protection view. Our system needs to be able to operate in an environment where it's aware of all the activities and we're aware of all the potential targets, so we can target the response without having to unplug, quote unquote, the entire environment. And of course, once we identify the compromised entity and locked it out, we need to initiate the targeted recovery process so that we can get back to the operational state. And the beauty of the targeted recovery is that you don't need to recover the entire environment. You don't need to spend potentially days or even weeks to recover from the full-on backup. Now, some of you will obviously tell me, maybe later in the questions, that what about performance? Consistent and constant policy validations are expensive. Data encryption all the data, it's expensive. It's expensive from both transparency perspective and it's expensive from performance perspective. That was true years ago when we just ventured in the world of encryption. We used to have to use the crypto accelerators card. We used to play tricks with the encryption algorithms in order to optimize the key management communication. We used to do all this. Technologies have come a long way. We now have no excuse but to encrypt all the data. For one thing is that there's no such thing as a data that's not sensitive. And for another, there's really no severe performance impact anymore. With our solution as one of the reference data points for you, you can observe between 3 and 7% performance degradation only. So there's no excuse to encrypt the entire data set because every data element is sensitive, if not by itself, then in the context of other data elements. And data is everywhere. This one represents a little bit simplified view of a 5G network architecture with multiple device edges. Keep in mind that what we used to have a core data center that contained and stored enterprise data, had a pretty substantial physical security, and all the other security measures like firewalls and detection intrusion systems and so on and so forth. To accommodate the 5G network speeds, the data can no longer reside in the data center because it's just too expensive from the network perspective to reach out to the data center every time a decision needs to be made at the device level. Therefore, you can see the data moving out of the data center throughout of those regional data centers and edges all the way to the gateway and device edge, which means the data is everywhere. And as we talked about multi-tenancy and additional business value derived from data, additional people and additional entities are accessing the data sets out on the edge. So think of a cell phone tower with a small microclusters attached to it that may be implementing a particular aspect of the 5G network infrastructure. That basically means that this tiny data center, half a rack, does not have any, if at all, physical security, very easy to compromise, very hard to reach from the maintenance perspective, and it's just very, very vulnerable. So what we need to have is a set of technologies that can protect and manage the data protection centrally, whether or not you have 5,000 devices or 500,000 of devices. And as we say, granularity here becomes very, very important because if one compromised container compromises the entire storage system, that's a no-go, right? This is where you start getting into massive recovery endeavors that take weeks. And in order to achieve granular response capabilities and granular recovery capabilities, we need to have granular data protection. Now, what we say at Zettaset is that what ACS or Red Hat Advanced Cluster Security, that's part of the Advanced Cluster Management, what it does to container registries and container runtimes, Zettaset software does to the data. We provide the same enterprise and granular level of protection that is high performance and, more importantly, completely transparent. You don't change a single aspect of your business process in order to operate the software. Data protection operates in the background, and not only encrypts, but also monitors. So you can detect the compromises faster and you can address them in a more structural and more precise and more surgical way. Going back to Jenna's statement that Red Hat provides an extraordinary amount of data protection and security tools as part of the platform, it goes really well beyond providing just the security and protection. It gives you what we call the universal-based images that allow us as software vendors to certify our software, to make it available through Red Hat ecosystem catalogs. And you as a customer, what it means for you as a customer is that you download the software from a trusted source. You know that all the container images, and there's even in our software, there's quite a few container images that come as part of it. You know that these container images come from trusted source, come from a secured registry, and they have not been compromised, and they've been through a rigorous certification and testing processes. And also through the OpenShift operators, the deployment is very much seamless. Ultimately, where we're going with this is what we call one-click compliance. And whether or not you have a compliance regulation in your locality where you need to satisfy either financial compliance regulation or healthcare compliance regulation, or you're just after what we call the good security and good data protection, we've created an environment where we go towards what we call the one-click compliance, which is our compliance policies, the Zettaset data protection compliance policies, are part of the Red Hat stable policy collection that is part of the Red Hat advanced cluster management. Once those policies are deployed, they will scan your clusters. They'll determine if the clusters don't have data protection software, mark them as being in violation of those policies. And then by changing the policy from informational to enforcement state, you will essentially trigger a flurry of activity on your clusters where our operators will be deployed to those clusters. They will install the data protection software, and you will end up with a cluster in a protected state. The persistent volumes will be encrypted with a unique encryption key per persistent volume. Everything will be encrypted in the background, and you will have centralized management and monitoring tools watching after this data protection system and alerting you and allowing you to establish policies and actions which take place once the environment's been compromised. So that's the software piece of it. With that in mind, I'm going to now pass it to Taylor so he can tell you why Zettaset and Advent One are better together to provide the ultimate business value.
Thanks very much, Maxim. I'll just share my screen. Just give me a sec. Okay. So sort of further to what Maxim and Jenna have said, that the adoption of container technology is continuing to grow. So what we've got here is from a 2021 survey from the CNCF, and 96% of organizations who responded are either using or evaluating Kubernetes in their environment. If we look at our region in particular, Australia and Oceania, there's 45% in production and at 42% in POC. You'd obviously expect that POC number to convert into production over time. Of the same set of respondents, one of the main challenge that was identified, or the top two challenges, were storage and security, which are two things that, as Maxim described, that the Zettaset are able to help with, securing your storage, making security simple from a storage perspective, to be able to protect your data that's running in those container Kubernetes environments. The other part of it is, this is from a Datadog survey from their respondents. They found that the PVC, or persistent volumes, excuse me, and the amount of persistent storage that's being run in these container platforms is also continuing to grow, where I suppose that historically it's more ephemeral sort of systems or workloads that were running inside a Kubernetes environment, but there's sort of more and more persistent data that's finding its way in there that needs to be protected. In addition to that, Red Hat OpenShift from the same survey, adoption is also growing. So from the respondents from the Datadog survey, they saw a 28% growth over the prior year. And I think there's some Red Hat stats that Jenna worked through earlier that obviously Red Hat OpenShift is growing. And if you look at it from a market perspective, Red Hat have pretty much almost half of the market share of the container software market. So obviously Red Hat are a leader in that area with the OpenShift product and the capabilities that go around it. So securing the workloads running in OpenShift or in any container environment is obviously critical. The risk of data theft and data breaches continues to rise. So how can we help reduce the burden on developers making security decisions? So it's not just developers. That's obviously the de facto place for developers to work now is in Kubernetes. However, there's a lot of companies deploying ISV or third-party software into something like OpenShift that needs to be secured. And how do we make it easy? So having some automated policy management needs to be simple with a negligible impact on performance, which Maxim stepped through in an earlier slide. The encryption should be transparent to developers and consumers of the platform. It just needs to work. And I think that's where Maxim was able to demonstrate just how simple this can be. So Advent One, Zettaset, and Red Hat obviously are working together, and Zettaset provide a unique capability in modern data protection, as Maxim's taken us through. And as Jenna mentioned, Advent One's one of a small number of Australian Red Hat Premier partners. And we've got to focus on containerized workloads. We've also got to focus on security. We're able to help our clients in these areas. So really what we're trying to position ourselves to be the glue that sort of binds the container platform and your security needs together to really try and make this frictionless and nice and simple. So the role that we're really going to play is, look, our clients, you're the experts on your business and the applications that support it. And we sort of, take pride ourselves on playing a role as an expertise in securing enterprise workloads. So our service is really complementary. And we've got a local team here in Australia, and we're ready to start when our clients are. So sort of where to from here, one of the things that we work with our clients continually is to really understand the gaps you're trying to fill and how to overall lift your security posture. The adoption of Zettaset data protection, how do we make that simple? It is a simple tool, but how do we accelerate the adoption of it to make sure that when it does get put in place, that everything's working properly and you're able to be comfortable that your workloads have been secured correctly. So obviously open to working through a proof of technology and an in-depth work through of how Zettaset can help protect your data. So just for those who've joined the webinar, we're obviously offering a funded proof of technology for the attendees who've joined the call. And we'd be more than happy to go through that and understand what your requirements are and what you're trying to do. And if we can help get some data protection in place and be able to demonstrate the value of what Zettaset can provide. And I think that was really it from me. I'll just throw it open to a Q&A. And see if there's anyone on the call who has any questions or any further information we can sort of try and walk through.
Thank you, Taylor. Thanks, Maxim.
All I can do, I'll stop the share there. And Maxim, did you have any final thoughts?
No, Taylor, I think you narrowed it down pretty well, is that with Advent One kind of driving the effort and Zettaset providing the security software, like I said, we're making security so simple, data protection so simple. There's really no excuse for not deploying it. So, and we're obviously here to work with you all the way to make sure your deployment is very smooth. Our deployment is operator-based and very automated. So very little touch. At the same time, we're here to support you guys every step of the way.